Hey, I'm Scott,
And I'm Dave.
and that's us. We're still working on that, man. We're XR at work, is what we like to call ourselves. But welcome back for another episode. We're really excited today. We have Paul Davies, technology fellow with Boeing, here today, and we're looking forward to getting into some good conversation. Paul is a source of mentorship and guidance and support for all of us in the XR community. And Paul, we're super happy to have you here. Tell us about yourself and what you're doing at Boeing, and let everyone get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm Paul Davies. I just passed 20 years at Boeing, and for about 15 of those, I've been working in the XR space.
Wow.
So, yeah, it seems like it just makes me feel really old when I tell people that. Started in about, I don't know, it was about 2006-ish, 2007. And then, I met another tech fellow actually at Boeing who was just starting to explore the area, and he was looking for some help on his project. So kind of got really interested in it right off the bat. And since then I've, ran with it. I looked at it at different use cases, and then recently really focused in on manufacturing, but maybe we can get into that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, so I mean, 15 years in this space is an eternity. I mean, this is, relatively new space for everybody. So can you talk to us about what got you into XR? Like what was there 15 years ago, that got you really excited?
Yeah, well, it was really just the concept back then. So, mostly it was like people were, putting together post-produced examples of what AR could do, but nobody could really produce those in like real time. There was the tracking wasn't available. So I started out by reading a paper about it, and what really interested me was the value that I could instantly see the value that it can generate, the benefits it can generate. The concept of bringing digital data and placing it in somebody's world. And like I said, in manufacturing now, what that means in terms of quality and things, I just saw that right off the bat. So we were working with some universities and a couple small companies just trying to develop like maybe machine like tracking algorithms, just trying to figure out like where a camera is. And we have some real basic examples of, of that working, but we couldn't really produce anything real time meaningful. So it was very researchy. And I don't want to jump ahead. In my opinion, like 2016 was right around the time that things pivoted and it became much more mainstream. So.
Absolutely. Oh, I mean, that's kind of the HoloLens, right? I assume that's what you're talking about is the...
Right around. Yeah, there's a couple other manufacturers trying the same thing, but HoloLens launch, completely transformed this space, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I'm sure it probably felt pretty validating too when, HoloLens launched, and that you've already been in the space for 5+ years, and then all of a sudden Microsoft comes along with a a piece of hardware that can actually do what you've been talking about.
In fact, so we went, because having researched and worked in this space, I knew how hard some of this was, like figuring out pose of a camera. When I first went to Microsoft, the first version of the HoloLens that we get to see, Boeing got like some preview. It didn't look like a HoloLens. It actually had this big headpiece. All the electronics were exposed. And the computer, you had to hang around your neck. It was this big thing that hung on your chest. And they took us into this studio, and I was looking around, and I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it was real. I thought they had like tracking cameras behind the walls or something, to aid in the pose determination. And I was asking all these questions, and they couldn't answer any. They weren't allowed to answer any of them. I just didn't believe it, at first. And then, a couple of days later, it really sunk in, and I was like, "Wow, it's really here." I mean, it's not perfect, but what we can do now is going to change.
Well, that's the amazing thing. To me, I've only been in the space, 6 or 7 years. So half the time that you have, but like in that time frame, it's been HoloLens was kind of the genesis, for me. But now, like the iPhones have LiDAR, you carry around, something that can localize in your pocket. I mean, it's amazing how far the technology's come, in such a short, period of time. So like where I was going with that is, having kind of started, where you did, and then up till now, like what was the first use case, with a real, piece of hardware that you guys saw that you're like, wow, this is something that we should, pursue?
I would say that was actually before the HoloLens. We were working in the Boeing El Segundo factory where we make satellites, and we actually outfitted one of the production cells with it was a Vicon motion capture system. We spent quite a bit of money, installing all these cameras around the cell, and then we had a tablet, Windows, what was it, Windows 7 back then, I think, or maybe Windows tablet, just running the standard, Boeing Windows load, and we had markers on the tablet. We were tracking the tablet with the camera. We wrote all the code ourselves. And we were showing, they're called waveguides. They're like little hardware pieces on satellite boards. And we were showing where these waveguides need to be installed. And at that point, when we got it working, it was like the first time I actually saw the concept be, kind of reduced to practice, with my own eyes. And I thought, yeah, this is going to like change the way we do things. But at the time, of course, the hardware needed was so much and expensive and complicated, and we didn't have any way to get the data in. It was all manually processed and put onto the tablet, and it was all very, but that was the first time really when I saw it, and I was like, yeah, this is going to work at some point, and it's going to change so much. Yeah,
that's amazing. So I mean, a challenge I think for anybody, I mean, a lot of the folks that watch or listen to our podcast are people who are trying to get into XR. They may have a year of experience. They may, just be, fresh. This is their first time hearing about it. Talk about like how you think about hardware, because the space moves so fast that, like I think the inclination for a lot of businesses is that like you just go and buy like a bunch of headsets and then you deploy them, and, it creates a lot of value. Is that how you think about it? Or is it more of kind of a structured approach of like, you buy and test incrementally?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the use case and what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, you might be able to just go buy a headset and, use some off-the-shelf app if it's a very simple kind of use case. What we're trying to do is I guess much more, what you might call the long game. We're trying to like scale this and deploy it, ultimately hundreds or more devices, and then the question becomes like, how do we get data to them? Can they be on the network? How do users authenticate to them? So much bigger question. But I mean, you can just go get a headset and get some value out of it. It's, say if you're a small company and you're trying to get, say, some consistency and quality of a manufacturer of a part or something, you could just create an XR experience using existing tools and sideload it to some headset and use it that way. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, one of the big things that I say a lot, and I would imagine you would agree, Paul, is that everything that we need to be able to bring value in manufacturing right now through XR, I mean, there's tools you can grab and go do remote expert calls, do guided workflows, do VR training now, relatively low barrier to entry and cost to entry. But when I think about like your journey, like you were saying, there was probably a big chunk of time there when your company, your employer had to have more of an appetite for investing money without any foreseeable perhaps return, right? Were those some kind of dark days where were they getting impatient with you? Or was there a big race for you to get ROI positive with XR?
There's always the pressure to get to show the ROI and generate the value. Big companies like Boeing, we're a big ship and we turn, slowly, but we do it with purpose. And like I said, play the long game. And I think we understand that ultimately, I mean, I'll probably go on a limb and say we probably are still not ROI positive on the money, the research we've been doing, and all the development and everything when you compare to the usage. But we know it will be, and it's it's not just gonna go slightly positive. It's gonna go like heavily positive.
Mm-hmm.
In the pilots we've done, we've seen like really significant benefits. But the problem is we still can't like fully scale it because of some of the things I mentioned, like security and data translation and all those kind of things. So the pilots have had to be slightly constrained in terms of like number of users and how we're doing certain things, and so yeah. But I don't think there's any question, big picture, about what the future looks like. It's just when we'll get there, has been a challenge. I mean, I've always thought it's a couple of years away, but it's kind of
it's always a couple of years away. Yeah, no, yeah. I hear you on that. Well, and that's one of the things, when we talk to to folks who are interested in getting started in the space, I always kind of say like, hey, buy one or two of the devices and work on getting an understanding of how the device works. How do people adopt it? Do people like it? What are really kind of get your chops around the actual implementation of it, because buying the headset's easy. It's getting it on the head of people and having them actually use it in a consistent way. Yeah. I think has been the challenge that we've run into around just having it be the default that people think about when they go to do work. So can you talk a little bit about when you guys are thinking about rolling something new out, like what's that process look like? Is it are you collaborating a lot with the individuals that you're talking to, or is it more like you guys fully build out the use case first and then come and work with the teams?
I say it's a bit of both. We have some fully built out use cases, and we put them into like categories under. So the platform I work on is BARC, the Boeing augmented reality kit. So under there, we have certain defined use cases that are fully flushed out. So a lot of things we see, like a use case like fastener installation, where you maybe on a wing you've got like thousands of fasteners, and certain holes get different fasteners, or anything. It's not doesn't always fasteners, but the location of features. That's a very common use case. So when that comes up, it's really just a case of we'll just provision a new BARC backend for that particular team. They can go get the app. We published all the app in a little internal app store. They can go get it and install it, and they can just use it really without our involvement in our team. But it's not always like that. Sometimes there's new ideas and new use cases that we haven't thought of, or some of the more complicated complicated in terms of like where the data comes from. Like whole locations are pretty easy. You just get XYZ points, right? But if we're talking about like systems installation, CAD models that may be coming from Teamcenter or whatever, a lot of times we have to develop some kind of data pipeline to bring that data in. So that takes a lot of interaction with the specific group, the program, whatever program it is, and working together sometimes for several months to build that, so that then that it can scale. We always want to do things, at least with BARC, that are scalable. So I would never propose like a offline, if someone was involved in, a person was manually exporting or converting data, that to me would not be a production solution. Mm-hmm. So we always take the time, I'll say, to do it right. I mean, when I say right, I just mean for our environment. Mm-hmm. And that can take months sometimes of working with teams.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. I will say it feels very easy to have a bespoke use case, in XR where you apply it one time, but mm-hmm. the scale piece of this from a data architecture perspective, security, authentication, all that stuff that you talked about feels still very difficult, and it gets better every day, but it still feels like that's a challenge. So do you have that for your folks as well, the kind of challenge with security and all the fun stuff?
Yeah, that's the biggest challenge, actually, I think, these days. The HoloLens. I mean, we don't have any XR headset that is, I'll say, truly integrated with our IT infrastructure. So you can't log on natively, I can log on to my computer, right, my Boeing computer, but I cannot log on natively to a HoloLens. So we've had to build an architecture that, mm-hmm. Using QR codes and things that we can get users authenticated. But that took a lot of effort with InfoSec and others to buy into that, and it's not ideal, right? So in the way we've done it, when you put the HoloLens on, you have to find a Boeing computer on the network to log on to a website first, and then you look at a QR code, and then the HoloLens says, okay, I know who you are. And any time you do that, you're adding more steps for the user. No mechanic, wants to go and find a computer in the factory to log on to the HoloLens. It should be easier,
Yeah, so, definitely. Yeah. No, it's definitely a constraint, and I mean, I think everybody in the space, feels it right now. Like we have the same challenge with like our training data, right? If you want to go and throw on like a Pico or an Oculus and be able to log in and do a training, you have to log into a computer to get a PIN that mm-hmm. then you enter into the headset in order to be able to do that. And it's, nobody wants to kind of go through that friction, right? So I think that's a huge area of opportunity, for the whole space over the next, couple of years. Like you said, 2 years.
Totally. 2 years.
So you've seen a lot of devices and software platforms come and go over the years, Paul. I mean, right now is certainly like Dane and I. We've only been in this industry for 6 or 7 years. We're no Paul Davies, but I mean, just even in the time that we've been in here, I've seen a lot of hype cycles and noise cycles and stuff, and there's certainly no shortage of news and alerts and promotions going on. I mean, what do you see that you like? I mean, because you've seen a lot of stuff come and go. What do you think's got some sticking power? What are you excited about that's floating around out there? Any devices or platforms or any concepts you think are gonna survive?
I don't know if I want to commit to saying anything.
We are recording, yeah.
Might be totally different, and then they'll be like, "Oh, look at this Paul Davies."
We've never been right on the show, so it's okay, man.
No, I have seen a lot. I mean, if I think back, we were first working with a company called Total Immersion out of Paris in France. And so we worked with them for a while. They had an engine called Diffusion. We wrote a lot of code in Diffusion. They went away. And then we started working with Mateo, for anyone who's been in the space for a while, German company, had their own SDK, worked with them, actually developed a lot of stuff in their engine. They went away. They got bought by Apple. And that was, I don't know what year that was. That was like maybe 2016, somewhere around there, maybe before then, actually. And, Apple, still haven't come out with their headset. I mean, they've announced it, but you can't really get it yet. So that just shows you, like, Apple were making bets on this, acquiring companies like 2015, let's say. And 8 years later, they still don't have, they've got AR Core on the phone, obviously, in iOS, but like they still don't have, a headset available. So, I mean, just in terms of what I like these days, I mean, Boeing has, I don't know, hundreds of HoloLenses. That's about the only AR device I'll say that we have a lot of. I've got a Magic Leap 2 in the lab, and there might be some other things floating around, but by far it's the HoloLens that we're using. So the Vision Pro might change all that. We'll see.
What's funny is you were mentioning, when you first saw the HoloLens and there's all the wires and stuff that come off of it. It made me think of the Apple headset, that you have the pack that you carry around with you.
Yeah.
What's your impression of that? Because it seems like that's a very dividing feature, having the compute be not on headset.
Yeah, I mean, it's just trade-offs. I mean, I think in manufacturing could be problematic. I mean, safety is obviously top priority, and so getting snagged on something or is obviously a big problem. It could be alleviated with like a quick release connector or something in case you snag it just kind of comes off. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, comfort of the device is really important because otherwise people won't wear it. In my personal opinion, the HoloLens is okay for like maybe 15 minutes, 30 minutes, but then it starts to get a little kind of, so yeah, I think we're all grappling with like, what can we get into a lightweight, how do we make it light on the head, but also not have other issues come,
Yeah. Well, so like I have a couple thoughts about that. One is, I mean, if you think about the difference in compute of what the new Apple headset will have versus like an Oculus, I mean, you're looking at a mobile chip versus essentially a MacBook, and that's pretty amazing if they're able to execute, on that well. I think it'll allow for a lot of experiences that go far and beyond, what we have today. But I also, I think back to like the first conferences that I went to where we were demoing the early stuff that we built. I literally would travel with the desktop computer with me and like all the lighthouses and stuff for the Vive, and we would go and put people, and it was like honestly, it was a terrible user experience. But, I think sometimes it's easy to think like, oh man, we're not quite there yet. And then you think back, only a couple of years and it's, really different space.
I mentioned Total Immersion, right? The very first time the first time they came to our lab, they flew over from France. They had 3 desktops, 3 computers. One was for the rendering, and one was for the tracking, and one was for like the OS or the UI or something. And they had to network them all together. And they had like a circuit card, like just a generic circuit board. And what they would do, they would hold this circuit board up in front of a camera. It was like a Sony Handycam, not even a webcam.
Yeah.
Hold it up in front of the camera, and it would like show some content on top of the circuit card. So they were tracking it, and then able to rent. And it took 3 desktops. You know,
Oh my gosh, it's like a LAN party. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I agree. Just looking at that relatively short time frame, that may have been like 10 years ago, or maybe a little more. Look how far we've come now.
Well, and it's funny too, like, so, I used to travel and I take my HoloLens with me, and inevitably I'd get stopped at every airport going through security, and they'd open it up and look at it and, wipe it down with their special, wipes or whatever, because nobody knew what it was.
Yeah.
And so it's funny.
Let me show you something really quick. So you talk about like going through airports. So part of Bark is this alignment process. And so we have it's like an alignment tool where it's 3D printed.
Yeah.
It has this point on the back, and you can select a point on the aircraft. So you get pulled aside by TSA with this, and they're like, "What is this?" It's like, okay, well, how long have you got? It's like it's a tool for a HoloLens, and it's just like,
that's hilarious.
Pandora's box, man. Yeah. So Dana and I both do a fair amount with just 360, real photogrammetry with creating manufacturing experiences to be consumed on laptops or tablets or in training rooms, that sort of thing. You guys heavy into 360? Are you deep down in that path? We've been talking about head-worn AR. I mean, but what about computer vision or 360 experiences?
When you say 360 experiences, you mean like, is that a particular like soft piece of software, or just in general? You mean like
just in general, just a walkthrough of a plant, or training markers on top of machines in a 360 experience?
Gotcha. Yeah, we do some of that. Like we've done some factory layout example, and then you can put a HoloLens on, and you can go see like simulations of equipment moving down an aisle, for instance, and how it would move. So yeah, I mean, we have actually some of our factories are entirely laid out in VR now. Not a couple that come to mind. Yeah, we've done some of that.
Good. That's really cool. Well, you were talking about like the safety, aspect of this too. I think that's a big, piece that like Scott and I have had to address as we've gone and, put headsets on people who are working in the facilities. Can you walk through like, obviously there's intrinsically safe rules and there's all kinds of things. Like, how do you look at those challenges, when they come up in a project? How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's an important topic. So I actually put safety into like two categories. One is like making the everyday use of the device so it doesn't add any risk to the user. But the second is more of a benefit. You can add features to the use case that enhance safety. They make it safer for the person to do a job. So yeah, on the first one, we've worked with our EHS teams, and they've given us like some requirements. And so some of we have a document internally that governs the use of these devices, and how, especially in the early days when someone first starts using it, how many hours per day they can use it, and it increases over time. And some of the features we've added, like if you start walking, so the HoloLens has motions, it knows where it is. If we detect that the user is walking, we blank the display, everything goes off. And so you can't get distracted or trip over, or maybe more importantly, you can't hide a hazardous real world condition with a virtual object. And then as soon as you stop walking, it comes back on. So that's good. It takes a little explanation, because as soon as someone starts wearing it, they're like, oh, it keeps flickering. They got to explain what's going on.
Stay still, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So on that, real quick, did you build that in-house, or was that an app that you acquired?
We built it in-house.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
Built into the feature of all the Bark apps and use cases have that baked in.
Terrific. Okay.
Yep. And then the second one, which we've kind of done less of, I think we have a patent. In fact, we do on these topics. Like if you're wearing a HoloLens, for instance, if the person is kneeling, because that the Z height off the floor is only 2 feet instead of 6 feet. And if they're looking up or whatever. So you can do things like detect if they're looking up for too long, they're at risk of neck strain. So you can maybe have an alert that says, take a break or whatever,
Yeah. So, wow.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, we thought about those things too.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Like, I think a lot of times, so I think there's a process piece of this that's kind of cool too around, so like toolbox talks, right? Like traditionally they may happen on like a Monday, and you're doing work on like, Friday or whatever. And, maybe they forgot what you talked about, during that time. The thing that's interesting, like guides, for instance, is you can embed the actual safety training aspects of it directly into the experience of doing the work. And so that's an interesting thing for me as well, is to think about not segmenting out, safety from operations, and thinking of it more as it's a continuity. It's part of the process of doing work. So I think that's a big, piece for us too, is not so much, like the data stuff that you were talking about is incredible, but, just thinking about it in the context of like, you can, you can just like use the HoloLens to improve the process, too. Because, it's like people process technology type of thing. Like we want to make sure that we look at the process that we're working on. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. Thanks.
Is there is there something that you're looking for? Is there something that you feel like once we figure out how to address it, it opens a lot of doors?
I don't know if there's one thing. I mean, there's a few things that I kind of mentioned them, but it's hard to say. I mean, I would point back to like the IT, the ability to integrate these things into an IT infrastructure, whatever that looks like for you. That seems to be the biggest sticking point at the moment. And so, like you mentioned, Scott, some of the simple use cases, if you just want a remote expert, maybe that's not so hard, right? All you need is a device on a hotspot, right? But if you're trying to fully, integrate these things into like a complex manufacturing environment,
sure,
that's the whole. Yeah. So I would say that would be the one thing we need to solve. And I was at AWE this year, and I heard a company, Arbor XR, I believe they were talking about NPM management of devices, and that was really encouraging, seeing like this whole dedicated solutions for XR devices now. So yeah, maybe we're making some headway there as a collective industry.
There are some I think you're right, Paul. There's some very manual, kind of tedious obstacles and sometimes roadblocks to integrating XR into enterprise, into corporate environments, and identity management and device management, and a lot of those things. They're just so tough still, and it is encouraging to see companies like Arbor XR that are taking and trying to bring some consolidation or simplicity to that. We've got a ways to go, but I think we're moving the needle a little bit every year, it would appear.
It's like, in a big company, everyone has a laptop and everyone has a phone. So IT is well positioned and set up to support those things. If I break my laptop, if I drop it, I probably have a new one by tomorrow. And they're just very well established processes. But with XR devices, a lot of it's still really a fraction of the population really using them. So IT are somewhat constrained to what they can do, because it's compared to the laptops and the phones and other things they're trying to manage, XR devices is not really a big thing. So
it's not a big priority, and I think we're afraid of the things that we don't understand, and it's easier for them to just kind of put people like us off because they don't really understand. I don't know what that thing is you're bringing to me, Davies, and I really don't have time to mess with it. I got laptops to manage.
Yeah, exactly. I do. I hear exactly that message.
Yeah. No, well, and it's interesting too to think about, there's kind of the user adoption, and then there's the kind of business adoption. And, what I find is that if you put the headset onto people, they usually will be like, oh, this is great. If I could use it for XYZ, they'll give you the use cases that you're looking for. The challenge for me is that it's a very visceral experience, and so you have to put a lot of people into the headsets, and I can't fly everywhere and and do that. And so trying to scale that, I think, is a challenge as well. So I guess, do you have any advice for folks that are kind of in the same spot, trying to scale out XR, or even maybe we'll broaden it out and just say anybody who's looking to get into this space, how would you recommend, or what tips would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, do demos to the right people who can influence other people. Because like you said, you can't be everywhere. You can't, you're not going to, as they say, boil the ocean yourself. So you've got to get buy-in from people who will support that message. And so figure out who they are. It might be a program manager, it might be a director, it might be your boss, whatever. get them bought in, and then they will work to buy more people in, and you need to get that collective effort rolling where you all support each other.
Mhm.
And so we've taken that approach. We've had mixed, sometimes successful, like for instance, years ago we were having a lot of problems getting some device on the network. It was a HoloLens 1. And so we were able to get a demo with a program vice president, and we showed him what we were trying to do, and he immediately latched onto it, and he really supported it. And so he worked it, at his level with IT, way above our level. And then before we know it, we had a solution to get in the device on the network. So it's all about who you can engage, I think.
Definitely. Well, and I think, would you agree that putting people into the devices and having them actually experience it is a key part of that process? Or have you had success with like sending videos out to people, to show them what it can do?
No, I think you have to wear the headset. If you're talking about a head-mounted experience, I mean, if it's, so let's say HoloLens, you can show pictures of what it looks like, and you can show a video, right? You can capture, and show the video. Maybe people will get the concept, but I mean, almost without fail, people that I've shown the video to, and then they see the real experience, they are just blown away. They're like, "Oh, I didn't know it was like this." And kind of the video. So it just goes to show that it's a totally different experience. And you probably heard the term "hollow smile."
Yep.
We call it the hollow smile. As soon as you put the HoloLens on, it's like, wow.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite aspects of our job is when people see that for the first time. The surprise is always fun to watch.
Yeah.
Something that I see a lot, Paul, tell me if you deal with this. I mean, our executives or maybe well-meaning stakeholders in our company and my day job come to me quite often with, "Hey, I saw this on YouTube," or "I saw this out there," or my neighbor's brother-in-law told me about this. And then they expect us to just go put that in place in enterprise. I mean, how do you deal with that if you're running up against that? I can tell you how I deal with it, but what do you say when that happens and you're kind of expected to do things you're not ready to do yet?
Yeah, that's a tough one. You got to manage expectations, and it's
Right.
kind of like, well, sometimes we would be more able to get that done, if we were to get the right support from the various functions we need, and that's
Right.
not quite there yet. So, but yeah, that's a very tough situation.
Yeah, I think one thing I've found is that if you can, to your point, Paul, if you can engage the right level of leadership and have them understand it deeply enough that they kind of get what you need as the next step, then sometimes you can get them to help you move the baton for you or explain, to other groups why, things are challenging or, something like that. But yeah, I think it always is a disservice when, you get the brand new LinkedIn, video. I don't know if you've seen that video of like the person getting on a bus and it's supposed to be like what AR could be. And there's just like stuff everywhere. There's like advertisements and
Yeah.
it's like every time I see that video, I'm like, oh no, like this is the dystopia of where we're going, because it's not adding any value to the person who's sitting in the bus. It's just bombarding them with additional information.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think none of us want to go there. I mean, it's bad enough on your phone, and then just imagine it filling your whole world.
Yeah. Well, that's my concern too with, a lot of the large, manufacturers now of the devices rely heavily on advertisements as part of the revenue streams. And so it's kind of an interesting, misalignment, I guess, of what I would like to see. Obviously they're not listening to me, but like what I would like to see from an XR perspective versus what the incentive is for a lot of these businesses. I think there could be a scary future there if we're not, really careful.
Yeah.
So
Are you guys doing any gamification or anything to kind of try and drive adoption or get people excited or keep it sticky? I mean, do you guys get into any of that, or do you not have to?
Not really. We've talked about it, but we've never really tried to pursue it in any meaningful way. The way I look at it is like to drive adoption is like, so there's a cost, right, to putting a HoloLens on your head, right? It's gonna mess up your hair. It's not gonna be comfortable for a lot, right? There's a cost to it. But so long as the benefit outweighs that. So let's say a person's job like really sucks, and they've got to like interpret complicated drawings, and they spend a lot of time and they get it wrong a lot of the time. Nobody wants to be in that situation. So if the benefits can outweigh the cost, then adoption you don't have to worry about. The problem is if they don't outweigh the costs. So if if your app is buggy and it crashes and the UI is no good and the data is old so they can't use it or whatever, then you've got costs of wearing the HoloLens, you've got costs of trying to use it. It'll just fall flat.
They're just kind of
is interesting though. It could be part of that. Yeah,
they're just going to pick the clipboard back up or the 3-ring binder or call somebody on the phone to help them out. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. That's an interesting kind of mental model too, because I think what you're highlighting there is that you want to allow people to do something that they couldn't do before. And if you're not accomplishing that, then like you're just adding, friction. So like an example, for us, like with training is, we used to constrain training to a certain time frame because, we didn't think that, like we could get through the content in X amount of time. And then we did it in VR and we moved like where you would do on the job training, like way up to like, the second day on the job, as opposed to several weeks. And, and it completely changed the process of how, people learn. And we were able to cut, a dramatic amount of time off of the actual, training process, but it's because we could do something different. And I think that's kind of a head fake, in a lot of these spaces, is like people will just throw on an Oculus and it's like, okay, we're just going to do what we do today, but we're going to do it in VR. And it's like, that's just worse. It's not better.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So that's a really good point though, is like, anybody who's watching this or listening to this and thinking about what their applications are, think about what are the constraints that go away when you can implement this technology, and how you really capitalize on the value of that. Cause I think that's the key, here.
The idea is to make life easier for people, and then you'll probably be successful. Yeah.
So, Paul, we're going to have at least 3 or 4 people watch this video, perhaps in the coming months. Any advice for kind of as a closeout, parting shot? Any advice for those that are maybe just getting into XR? They're tasked with bringing XR to their enterprise. What would you say to folks new or just getting into the space, and give us some wisdom here for our community?
Yeah, that's a big question. I would say like learn, try to attend conferences so you can get the lay of the land. A lot of different manufacturers doing things. Try to kind of get familiar with all of it. Try and learn the tools like Unity or Unreal or whatever. You don't have to be proficient in those, but just kind of understand the basics. And in my space, learn about the data side of things. So maybe some basics on CAD systems, what 3D models, how do you translate them, what's possible, what are the issues in translating models, and then I would say most importantly, engage the right people at your company, because you can't do it by yourself. So,
right. Yeah. Well, Paul, we really appreciate you being with us today, man. I know Dana and I are honored to have you on the podcast, and we'd love to have you back sometime.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been really fun, and I'd be happy to come back.
Great. So we see you at the conferences. I mean, you talked about AWE. AES, the Augmented Enterprise Summit's coming up this fall in Houston, Texas in October. We'll be there. Maybe you're going to be there.
I'll be there.
If so, Dane's got his credit card, so we're going to go out to eat, man. So we'll look for you. It's going to be terrific. But we just want to remind everyone that XR at Work exists to bring guidance and support and camaraderie to the community of XR practitioners. People like Paul sharing his wisdom and knowledge and experience. And we look forward to getting face-to-face with everyone in Houston at the Augmented Enterprise Summit. Paul, thanks again. We really appreciate you, buddy.
My pleasure. Thank you.